our economists are armed with all the research available in today's information age, why can't they agree on where our property markets are heading? In fact, the better question would be, why do so many get it wrong? So to understand a bit more about how economists make their forecast, in today's Property Insider show, I'm going to try and get inside the head of one of the few economists who's got a strong track record of getting it right. Of course, Dr. Andrew Wilson, Chief Economist of myhousingmarket.com.au. Hello, Andrew.
Hello, Michael. How are you today?
Good, thank you. Now, it's a scary thought getting inside your head.
Well, perhaps many have tried, but we'll see what we can do.
Well, we'll see where we can go, because today I'd like to explore what really causes changes in property values. Some people simplistically say it's just supply and demand. Others dig deeper into economic growth, interest rates, population forecasts, affordability, inflation, all those macroeconomic factors. And then, of course, there's market sentiment, consumer sentiment, which is clearly hard to get a handle on because it keeps changing. But today I'd like to start a series of these shows where we're going to talk about the multiple factors that you look for in your research, the things that influence you when you make your decisions and things you choose not to look at. But before we do, Andrew, I'd like a couple of questions. Firstly, why do most economists, most forecasters get it wrong?
Well, look, the whole essence of forecasting house prices, Michael, is fraught with issues of what we call in econometrics as non-linearity. And that means that the factors that influence house prices are discrete at the point where they don't have the same influence in terms of a set measurable outcome as others do. So things can change, and normal forecasting first port of call for methodology is what's called regression analysis. And that basically just follows the trend of what's gone before. But because things can come out of left field that influence house prices, as you suggested, a number of variables there that aren't linear, that can't be measured in a set trend, it means that forecasting, particularly over the medium to longer term, doesn't have that same level of accuracy in terms of other econometric models. And it's what's called white noise in the business, Michael. And the point is that the normal process of eliminating white noise doesn't reveal a stationary time series because there's not that linearity now. So that's the first lesson in econometrics this morning. I hope it was as clear as mud. But yes, what I'm saying is that anybody who's forecasting house prices beyond 12 months really is just throwing a dart at a dartboard.
Because there are too many fundamentals that you can't control. Another form of forecasting that I see is, here are four series. If interest rates go up 3%, this is going to happen. If the Reserve Bank interferes, this is going to happen. If the world comes to an end, this is going to happen. And they're my four forecasts. Where does that leave me, Andrew?
Well, you could have 100 forecasts, couldn't you, Michael? And you're going to get one right. And you can say, well, see, I got it right. But but you got the other 99 wrong. But and that's the whole point, and what I'm saying, what that scenario suggests, of course, is the issues with this difficulty in forecasting medium to longer term house price growth because of that non-linearity of the factors. And but the way around it is not to give 100 different variables of outcomes. It's really to recognise that medium to longer term forecasts, and I'm not sure what value there is there other than fodder for the media. Anyway, we're talking about shelter here, which is really what housing is all about. And I mean, I know we're fixated on the value of our asset and its return on the income return on that asset. And of course, the other thing, Michael, is revision of forecasts, not just having a number of forecasts, but then revising them every month as things then become clearer, obviously. And then you say, well, that was last month's forecast. This month's forecast is now this. I mean, what's the point of a forecast? A, if there's 100 different forecasts, or B, if you're going to change them next month, there's other factors become more clear.
Well, I think you gave us one of the main reasons for forecasts. The media loves it, but I think consumers love it also because we would like some certainty. The problem is forecasts don't give us a level of certainty when you look back at the track record. So before we get into what factors you take into account, let's go back and understand why I'm asking you these questions, why you, Dr. Andrew Wilson. So what's your background? What gives you the credentials that we should be paying attention to?
Well, I'll try to keep this to about an hour, Michael. Look, I have a background in property that is almost starts with the genetics. My grandfather was a property developer. So was my mother. I started my career in property as a trainee valuer, moved into sales as things picked up, as you usually do, and you can see the money rolling in from commission. So as a callow youth, I was in as a real estate agent for some 7 years, but all good things come to an end, as we're seeing now in real estate. And I moved into some property development and building, and then I guess found my real calling in life, and that was research, and moved into academia. Went through a number of qualification processes, ended up with a master's by research and a PhD in housing market economics, and worked as a research fellow, researcher, lecturer in universities for over 10 years. And I guess what that taught me was objectivity and rational analysis. You know, get away from all your preconceptions, because that doesn't hold, has no value in academic research. And but I then moved back into private industry as a senior economist and head of research for some major international cost construction enterprises, and then moved into domain back to housing, I guess you could say, as firstly a senior economist for Australian Property Monitors, and then chief economist for the Domain Group. So really my journey's been about understanding the industry at the grassroots level as a practitioner.
So let's dig into some of the data, and we won't be able to discuss it all today, but let's break it down first of all into what do you look for when formulating your forecast? What are the main drivers of our property markets?
Well, I'm going to sort of interrupt this, Michael, just very briefly, I promise, to show you something that will illustrate the difficulty in all this process. And this is something I'm going to show you which you haven't seen before. And this is my master's thesis.
Gee.
It's called
Activity.
That's from 1998. It's called Activity Dynamics of the Victorian New Housing Market. Well, there's a 50,000 word thesis which describes all those elements that we are going to try to sort of rationalise in terms of what's happening or what drives the housing market. And at the end of this, I sort of put together a methodology which was sort of reasonably unique at the time, which broke down the supply and demand factors into a chart, right? And there are thousands of different variables and relationships, and this is just the supply side of the market. So I actually have some, I guess, rigorous long-term research that's supporting what I'm about to tell you. And really, since then, nothing has changed. But to be quite honest, and not trying to sound, a little trite about it all, it is basically a process of how many people need houses and how many houses are being built. And you put that both together, and there are some big picture umbrella items that determine the matching of supply and demand. But overall, it is basically a simple process of matching those two elements. The fact is that our housing market dynamic is becoming flatter because some of those umbrella items are no longer as important as they used to be.
Well, one of the factors involved is interest rates.
Absolutely.
Let's have a talk about interest rates today, and then we'll work through the other factors down the track. So what's ahead for interest rates? What do they mean? How are they determined?
Look, I've been working with you for a number of years, Michael, and particularly supporting or being a guest at your doing presentations in your seminars. And as you know, the very first slide that I always discuss is the relationship between interest rates and house prices. Now, I was a little bemused earlier this year when the Reserve Bank of Australia, some bright young researchers there, have come out, and lo and behold, they've discovered that the two most important things that drive house prices are, yes, interest rates, can you believe it, and migration, so a population growth. Now, it's clear that interest rates, when you measure the cycle of interest rates versus the cycle of house prices, that there is a very clear relationship between higher interest rates and lower house prices, and higher house prices and lower interest rates. Now, it's not the same for every capital city or for every market because local factors will determine the rate of growth for those local markets.
So there are macroeconomic factors that affect all of us, whether it's interest rates, our government, tax rates. But then, as you said, there are also local factors that will affect how they work, including employment and supply and demand. But interest rates, everyone's wondering, where are they heading? What's going on? And I remember last year, some would have said you were a contrarian. It was even longer ago than that when you said there was no reason for interest rates to go up because everyone was predicting the property bubble bursting, based it on the fact that interest rates are clearly, definitely, certainly going to go up again.
Well, there's a 180-degree turn in the market sentiment. You can almost smell the burning rubber, can't you, Michael, this year versus last year. And, I was interested to read a comment recently in the media that, the fact that this has changed now, the sentiment from, a definite upward move being the next move to maybe being a downward move. And only those 6 months ago who were predicting an interest rate cut were the whack jobs of the market. Well, that was me. And I was on the public record of saying that I believed that there was no chance of an increase in interest rates as the next move and that likely we would see a cut in 2019. Now, people might say, well, that was just a lucky guess and I was trying to be a contrarian. But as you know, Michael, this was all rationalised and it was quite clear that there was no prospect of an interest rate increase in an environment where we were seeing incomes growth at record low levels for a record long period of time. Now, despite low interest rates in an attempt to stimulate the economy post the mining boom, it failed to stimulate incomes growth despite having strong labour markets. Now, this is a conundrum the whole world has faced, that low interest rates have failed to reignite inflation and incomes growth. So under those circumstances, and given that consumption was falling away, not surprisingly, given low incomes growth, and given that consumption makes up 60% of gross domestic product, we were always going to see a downward movement rather than an upward movement in rates to try to get more income, more dollars into people's pockets to try to lift our GDP, which of course now is looking very concerning in terms of the last 3 quarters being down and the last quarter being just a 0.2% increase. So of course the Reserve Bank has completely changed its view on where interest rates are going. We will likely see a cut this year, given the weakening not only of our economy but the global economy. But this was something that was eminently clear a year ago because of that very low incomes growth, despite high good jobs numbers, and the fact that this was happening right around the world. That there was no way known we would have seen higher rates because that would have crushed the economy. Now, that was rationalised opinion, Michael, that I used last year with my predictions, and it's certainly no surprise to me. In fact, I think perhaps even the horse may have bolted in terms of improving the economy with an interest rate cut, given we may need to keep all our interest rate energy in our saddlebags in case the global economy moves down sharply, which I don't think will happen, but certainly the signs aren't good at the moment.
So let's make it clear then the Reserve Bank's got a couple of roles. One is to keep our economy ticking over nicely and GDP going up, and the other is to control inflation. And it does that. It's only got one lever, basically, which is interest rates. If our inflation is booming and we're doing really well and wages are going up and inflation is rising, it slows things down by raising interest rates. Now, the last time I remember I could be out of touch was 2011, 12, 2010. Hasn't done it since then. And it control that. It stopped the property market. It stopped the things moving. But as you're currently saying, it's the opposite. So what the Reserve Bank sometimes does, and the federal banks around the world have done it, is actually lower interest rates to grease the wheels of industry, to stimulate businesses, to employ people, to buy things, to stimulate people to spend because they've got more money in their pocket. It just hasn't worked though this time, has it, Andrew?
Well, this is the problem that, economics tends to play by the rule book, and they don't understand, a lot of economists, that economics is not a statue, it changes. And just because monetary policy has produced a particular outcome over the past 3 decades, since it was really used as a significant lever in the early 1970s to control inflation, just because that happened then doesn't mean it's going to happen now. Things are changing. Things have changed, fundamentally in terms of our macroeconomy. you need to come up with different solutions. Now, we can't blame the Reserve Bank for getting it wrong, and getting it wrong they did, because they have to justify their decisions in terms of obviously the historical experience. But they always come late to the party in terms of interest rate policy, either one cut too many or one increase too many, but they have that responsibility. But this is a whole different ballgame now, Michael, and this is the problem with economics in a sense, is that it's locked into these rules that's why economists get it wrong, because they keep looking to the past to predict the future. And that's something, because economics is a reflection of the human experience, that, as we can see now, is fraught with danger. But certainly monetary policy, given how low interest rates are around the world now, we are unlikely to see an increase, a real increase, due to an inflationary breakout in interest rates, for years.
Now, interestingly, recently, the International Monetary Fund downgraded world economic growth forecasts. The Reserve Bank and even the budget downgraded Australia's growth forecasts. So you made an interesting point a while ago that the Reserve Bank needs some sort of buffer. It needs something in its tanks
Yes.
in case things go wrong.
Yep.
So it may be scared to lower interest rates now, even though they should have done it a month or two ago or a year or so ago, because it still needs something there in case it needs something to pull us out of a world recession. Is that right? Or world problem?
Absolutely. Well, absolutely. And our interest rates are still amongst the highest in the world, Michael. And that's why our dollar has been stubbornly high and hasn't moved, because we still suck in capital from overseas based on our relatively high interest rates. But I think the Reserve Bank's problem was in 2015, it got sidetracked with the Sydney housing market. And it was seduced by these predictions of housing market bubbles, asset bubbles, and it decided to interfere in that market environment. And through APRA, it targeted investors. Now, this was the pebble off the top of the mountain that's now caused this snowballing effect of falling prices through reduced investor activity. Reserve Bank should have had the confidence to let the market find its floor, as it always would have, given interest rates weren't going up. It always would have found its floor with speculative investors leaving the market as price growth moderated, rather than interfere as it did and caused was the clear catalyst for what is a crisis in confidence in buyers and sellers in markets at the moment, and a continued, certainly, trend of falling house prices.
Now, Andrew, you actually said that you don't think interest rates are going to change considerably over the next years, maybe even decade. But some people say, well, that's good. I want low interest rates. But I've been around long enough to know, I think it's the other way around. I'd rather hear the interest rates are going up because the economy is doing well, because my house prices are going up, and because my wages are going up.
Well, look, it's all relative, isn't it, Michael? Because the real point is that higher interest rates, although they're used as a bogey, and look, so I guess they are when you have to pay more for your mortgage because interest rates have risen. But interest rates typically rise when inflation is rising, and inflation is rising because prices are rising, and prices are rising because wages are rising. And higher interest rates are initiated to try to take the heat out of higher prices and the heat out of higher incomes. So we have more, we don't move into one of those wages prices spirals that really monetary policy was developed around, which happened in particularly in the 1970s, when we had inflation pushing towards 20%. Now, so really, in that sense, that higher interest rates are good news because it shows prices and incomes are growing to the point where activity needs to be tempered and moderated. Low interest rates show that there's nothing happening. And that's the conundrum in the economy now, is that we've had the lowest interest rates on record for a record length of time, and we don't have the incomes growth that typically is generated from that. And of course, we don't have the prices growth through inflation that is typically generated through that. So we have hundreds of thousands of people now marching in the streets, Michael, because they can't be in an environment where they're working year after year, yes, plenty of jobs around, and not making any impact on their prosperity levels because incomes aren't growing. So this low interest rate environment is not good news It gives us some stability and certainty in terms of the usual issues with rates and house prices, but it's not good in terms of the economy. And it's not just Australia that's experiencing this, Michael. This is a fundamental shift in macroeconomics that's being experienced for a number of years. In fact, way before Australia, since the GFC, which is 2008, this has been experienced in the Eurozone, the US and the UK. So this is a whole new ballgame now, Michael. Low interest rates, yep, good. You can, I guess, predict where your mortgages are going to be, but not good in terms of your income.
Well, that's one of the problems at the moment. People have got jobs, and I learned when I studied my little bit of economics that you give people jobs, you lower unemployment rates, and then supply and demand, wages go up and people feel fulfilled. But they're not getting that sense at the moment. They find their petrol prices, their electricity prices, everything else is going up, and their wages are not, Andrew.
Well, that's right. It's the three amigos are no longer the three amigos, Michael, and that was the relationship between interest rate prices and wages, and of course the employment market. That before that, all you had to do, and that was the role of the Reserve Bank, was to stimulate a weaker economy with lower interest rates to create a full employment environment. Now that's happened everywhere. We have strong labour markets right across the nation, right across the globe and across the nation. And yet we don't have the incomes growth that typically comes from competition for labour, from employers needing to push up wages. Now we're moving into a position which is quite concerning, where perhaps we don't have the bargaining environment in terms of wages growth based on productivity that we had since the Accord way back in the 80s was introduced. And that's very dangerous if we're going to have wage rises that aren't based on productivity gains, because that means there will be losers and the winners will only be short-term winners. So this is a very dangerous, I guess, in a sense, macroeconomic environment. And as you said, Michael, the point is that really perhaps the Reserve Bank now needs to be very careful about cutting interest rates given dark clouds on the global economy. But I do think they're now similarly being pushed by the market and ideologues in a sense, and particularly weak housing markets, to maybe make a cut, which really should have happened 3 years ago.
They missed their opportunity. Well, this was the first of a series of examining the factors that go into your setting your forecasts and your thoughts. Did we really get inside Andrew Wilson's head? Not really sure, but got a bit of a background about you. You were a real estate agent. You were a chartered surveyor as well. Wasn't that the case?
Well, well, that's part of my qualification. I'm a member of the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Look forward to catching up with you at Property Insiders next week to try getting a little bit further inside your head.
Well, let's try, Michael. We can always
we can always try. Thanks, Andrew. Bye.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you.